Welcome to Women and Resistance, a powerful podcast where we honor the courage, resilience, and revolutionary spirits of women across the globe. Hosted by Aya Fubara Eneli Esquire and Adesoji Iginla, we uncover untold stories of defiance against systemic oppression. Whether colonialism, racism, sexism, or economic injustice. From historic icons like Winnie Mandela and Fannie Lou Hamer to today's trailblazers, we shine a light upon those shaping a more just world. This is a call to honor the past, embrace the present, and build an empowered future. Yes, greetings, and welcome to another episode of Women and Resistance. I am a co-host, Adesoji Iginla, and with me, as usual, is my sister from another mother, Aya Fubara Eneli Esquire. Or today, she is Julia de Burgos. Welcome, sister. Yes, interesting that we're going to the island of Puerto Rico to learn about the lives and times of your good self. And first, what would you like to tell us about Julia?
I suppose I would like to start by thanking you for this time with you and your guests. And I would like to share what I wrote. It can be found in this volume, Song of the Simple Truth, which is actually a compilation of all my poems. It's fairly thick. So I will start there. My poetry was written in Spanish and subsequently translated. I did to English and to other languages. I did speak both Spanish and English. And in English, this poem is titled To Julia de Burgos. Of course, we would say to Julia de Burgos. Already, the people murmur that I am your enemy, because they say that in verse I give the world your me. They lie, Julia de Burgos. They lie, Julia de Burgos. Who rises in my verses is not your voice. It is my voice, because you are the dressing, and the essence is me, and the most profound abyss is spread between us. You are the cold doll of social lies, and me, the viral starbust of the human truth. You, honey of courtesan hypocrisies, not me. In all my poems, I undress my heart. You are like your world, selfish, not me, who gambles everything, betting on what I am. You are only the ponderous lady, very lady. Not me. I am life, strength, woman. You belong to your husband, your master. Not me. I belong to nobody or all, because to all, I give myself in my clean feeling and in my thoughts. You curl your hair and paint yourself. Not me. The wind curls my hair. The sun paints me. You are a housewife, resigned, submissive, tied to the prejudices of men. Not me. Unbridled. I'm a runaway Rocinante, snorting horizons of God's justice. You in yourself have no say. Everyone governs you. Your husband, your parents, your family. The priest, the dressmaker, the theater, the dance hall, the auto, the fine furnishings, the feast, champagne, heaven and hell, and the social. What will they say? Not me. Not in me. In me. Only my heart governs. Only my thought. Who governs in me is me. You, flower of aristocracy. And me, flower of the people. You, in you have everything, and you owe it to everyone. while me, my nothing I owe to no. You, nailed to the static ancestral dividend, and me, a one in the numerical social divider. We are the duel to death who fatally approaches. When the multitudes run rioting, leaving behind ashes of burned injustices, and with the torch of the 7 virtues, the multitudes run after the 7 sins against you and against everything unjust and inhuman will be in their midst with a torch in my hand. Who am I, Julia de Burgos? Some would describe me as a legend, an icon. But tonight, I want you and your listeners, your viewers, to see me, the human, the woman, the one who dared to own herself, paid a dear but necessary price for it. Because of what use is it to live for everyone and to lose yourself? And how many of you are owned still today by your social order, unable, unwilling, pay the price to be uniquely you? Part of the legend starts because, or some would call destitute upbringing. I was born on February 17th, 1914, in Carolina, Puerto Rico. I died in New York City at the age of 39. So what does this woman who lived short of 4 decades, what does she have to say to you? Why am I worth studying, my words worth poring over and thinking through and understanding at a deeper level? I was one of 13 children. 6 of my family members, my siblings to be exact, did not live to adulthood. They died of malnutrition, starvation. Yes, in a world where there is so much, where some, too few, have so much that they just discard without a second thought. My parents buried 6 of their 13 children. I suppose, given this start in life, it would not be a stretch to understand my sensitivity to loss and my understanding of social precarity. My mother, Paula Garcia, was an Afro-Puerto Rican. Father, Francisco Burgos Hans, farmed in rural Carolina. Despite my very humble beginnings, I excelled academically, and I eventually won a scholarship to University High School, and I completed my teaching credentials at the University of Puerto Rico in 1933. I began my career as a teacher, and then I married. And back then, there was an understanding that married women then leave the workforce to be devoted to their husbands and their families. I grew up in a very conservative Puerto Rico, very much shaped by colonialism and patriarchy. When I would not give up my teaching job, I was fired. I married Ruben Rodriguez Beauchamp, 1934. That union, as we call it, ended in divorce in 1937. Contemporary writers, reading through my letters and my essays and my poems, describe the marriage as unhappy and note that the fact that I had begun political organizing even at that age, and I had began literary tours, made the partnership increasingly incompatible. What is it about a woman coming into her own that makes her unfit for marriage? By the time I was 25 years old, I had published Poema en 20 Surcos, and I toured the island giving readings. By 1939, I published my second volume, and I self-published all of these volumes. My second volume was Canción de la Verdad Sencilla. In the early 40s, for a number of reasons, including the fact that though I loved my homeland, Puerto Rico, and would spend my life fighting for the nationhood of Puerto Rico, my homeland demanded a version of me that I could not be. I moved to Cuba and I studied there as well before I also moved to New York. Passionate relationship with Juan Isidro Jimenez Grullion. That relationship ended. Again, a life not becoming of the conservative Puerto Rican I was meant to be, or they thought I was meant to be. Later married musician Armando Morlin, and we divorced in 1947. In between those times, I immersed myself in the life of an Afro-Latina in New York. Some would call me a New Yorican. This was towards the end of the Harlem Renaissance, and I was greatly influenced by writers, some of whom I read, never met, many of whom I met as well. I became a columnist and eventually an editor at Pueblos Hispanos, the Hispanic people in New York. It was considered a communist paper by the FBI. And even amongst the rank and file of those who worked on that paper, I was considered even a little radical. The goals of our paper at the time were, quite frankly, ahead of where we were in terms of what we were fighting for. We promoted pan-Hispanic unity. Our goal was to bring together Spanish-speaking communities in New York, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Dominicans, Mexicans, Haitians. This again was not in keeping with the colonial ideas of the elitist Puerto Ricans who sought to separate themselves from their African roots and to whiten the race, if you will. But we understood that we needed to have this pan-Hispanic unity, a shared cultural and political front. Of course, this was very threatening to the powers that be. Founded during World War II, we aligned ourselves with struggles against fascism abroad and colonialism at home. I suppose today we would be considered Antifa.
Anti-fascist.
And when the term Antifa is used, most people don't even think long enough to understand that it means anti-fascist.
Fascist.
And is that such a horrible thing to be? We gave voice to the Puerto Rican diaspora. We served as a platform for Puerto Rican migrants in New York to express their struggles against racism, against poverty, and displacement. And I knew all of those ills on an intimate level. I struggled with instability, moving from place to place, sometimes boarding houses, trying to keep a roof over my head. At one time, I worked for the federal government. They came after me because of my poetry. They said they could not read it as just my personal views, that these were political acts. And so they came after me with a hatch, an act that they seemingly have forgotten. Today, as you glorify a fascist as your president, in the paper, I published essays, I wrote about news, and I also published some of my poetry that affirmed identity and our dignity. The paper also served as a cultural forum. It mixed politics with art, published literature, commentary on theater, and as I already noted, poetry and essays as well. And back then, of course, we did not have the technology you have today. The iPhones or the Twitter or the Google or the TikTok. We read papers. Those who were literate read the papers to others. And that is how we got our news, and that is how we thought through the issues of our time. We aimed to redefine Latino identity in the U.S. and beyond, and to get beyond the stereotypes that still inflame the imagination of the average American. Hence your wars against us, your unleashing of ICE agents against my community, even today. We showcased our intellectual, artistic, and our activism. We showcased everything we had. But we didn't just stop there. We mobilized workers and communities. And what does fascism hate almost more than anything else?
Organizing.
We advocated for labor rights, for social justice, and educational opportunities for Spanish-speaking communities in New York. Our articles often urged readers to engage in organizing and in political activism. We would most definitely have been telling them not to vote for the very one who would come for their livelihood. Where is the so-called free press today? Who has carried on the mantle? Who took the baton and is continuing the race in the way that we did? My columns often centered women and identity and independence, much to the chagrin, again, of those who would rather see patriarchy ruin us as it ran us. Pueblos Hispanos merged my poetry with journalism, making art a tool for political consciousness. Where are our artists today? How are we fighting back? Through all of these travails, fighting for the nationhood of Puerto Rico, struggling to keep food in my belly and a roof over my head, sometimes carrying my belongings on my own back. Found love at times, and I lost love almost all the time. I did have one love, though, who never deserted me. And that's my sister Consuelo. She was a sister and she was a mother. Consuelo helped to raise me. I would write letters back and forth with Consuelo, sharing my heart with her. And in some of my darkest times, Consuelo would ask me to come back home, to return to the land of my birth. What version of me could go back and live in Puerto Rico? Do you know that I was held up as an example of why Puerto Ricans should stay on their land and not go to foreign lands? Yes, certainly the United States. Look what is happening to her. Look how she can't stay married. Look how she has no children. Look how she does not. What version of me, tail tucked between my legs, could have returned to Puerto Rico, and what life could I have built there? Towards the end of my life, I was in and out of hospitals. I was so isolated. The loneliness consuming me. Notwithstanding so many that I did work with, so many names that you may know, like Juan Antonio Cortella, Carlos Quinos, Jesus Colon, the Puerto Rican writer in New York, pioneer of the Nuyorican literary tradition, Jorge Luis Chenier, Clara Lair, Puerto Rican poets and intellectuals who occasionally published in the same networks, Pedro Albizu Campos, who although he was in Puerto Rico most of the time, he was the Nationalist Party leader whose ideas strongly influenced me. As a matter of fact, when I was in Puerto Rico, I became the Secretary General of the Daughters of Freedom. I worked with Jesus Maria Lago, the activist and journalist connected to Puerto Rico leftist circles, even the language we use, leftist. Do you know the origin of this notion of left and right and why you use it, why it's weaponized today? I consorted with Spanish Civil War exiles and anti-fascist writers, Cuban, Spanish, Dominican intellectuals who had fled Franco and Trujillo. They often intersected with my community. I'm Puerto Rican. I'm Afro-Latina. I'm Nuyorican.
You are listening to Women and Resistance with Aya Fubara Eneli Esquire and Adesoji Iginla, where we honor the voices of women who have shaped history through courage and defiance. If you're finding these stories inspiring, Take a moment to subscribe, share, and support this platform. Together, we amplify the voices that deserve to be heard. Now, back to the conversation.
I worked with Nicolas Amor, Clemente Soto Velez, Bernardo Vega. He was part of an earlier generation in which my work circulated. And of course, I worked with writers of the Harlem Renaissance, other so-called leftist artists, Pan-American networks of poets and musicians. I was a part of a community of radical intellectuals, but the thing that you have to understand is that even in this community, you can also feel very much ostracized by the everyday people who are concerned that interacting with you will bring unwanted attention to them. When you know you're being surveilled by the FBI, and my files are still not completely open to the public, much of what's in the public sphere is heavily redacted. It makes people wary of you. It makes you wary of people. I would like to share some more of my poetry with you, if I may.
Please do, please do.
And this one, because I was rather, what would you all call it today? Light-skinned Afro-Latina. But I was always clear about my African heritage. And I was never ashamed of it. I embraced all parts of me. This poem in English is titled Aya of the kinky-haired negress. Ay, that I'm kinky-haired and pure black. Kinks in my hair, kaffir on my lips, and my flat-nosed Mozambiques. Black of pure tint, I cry and laugh, the vibration of being a black statue. A chunk of night in which my white teeth are lightning, and to be a black vine which entwines in the black and curves the black nest in which the raven lies. Black chunk of black in which I sculpt myself. Ay, my statue is all black. They tell me that my grandfather was the slave for whom the master paid 30 coins. Ay, that the slave was my grandfather is my sadness. If he had been the master, it would be my shame. That in men as in nations, if being the slave is having no rights, being the master is having no conscience. Ay. Wash the sins of the white king in forgiveness, black queen. Ay. The race escapes me and buzzes and flies toward the white race to sink in its clear water, or perhaps the white will be shadowed in the black. Ay. My black race flees, and with the white runs to become bronze, to be one for the future. Much of my work was multidimensional. I did not fit neatly into any box. And like I read in my very first poem, there were these dueling Julias, the Julia that society wanted me to be in order to survive, in order to thrive, in order to be seen as a success, in order to be seen as worthy of being Puerto Rican. Julia, who defied all definitions and who chose to be me. I challenged colorism, social rewards for lightness. I exposed how colonial hierarchies survive in taste, in hiring, in schools, and in the media. And oh, to my eternal sadness, how they still survive today. I offered a counter aesthetic where blackness is the measure of dignity, not a trait to hide. We should lift our heads up. The ones who should hang their heads in shame are the colonizers, the slave masters and mistresses, the ones who are so inhumane they deny the humanity of others. In one of my poems, Rio Grande de Loiza, I evoke river imagery, land, history, and identity under U.S. rule. And how is it that Puerto Rico is still a colony of the United States of America? Seemingly, we have made no progress in becoming a free people. The river functions as a living archive. It remembers indigenous presence, Spanish conquest, slavery, and the daily life of Afro-Puerto Ricans, our communities along the banks. The river is at once a lover, a witness, and a mirror where the speaker's body and the island's body meet. This fusion in my poem makes personal emotion inseparable from national history. I am Puerto Rico. I still bear the marks of colonialism. We still bear them today. Under U.S. rule, the river also figures in the sense of dependency and extraction. Who controls land, water, labor? Who controls memory? My people, ravaged by a hurricane, clamoring for electricity and water and the bare necessities of life. While an orange, I wouldn't dignify him to call him an orangutan because they have empathy and compassion, throws paper towels at us like we are wild animals. We do not walk out. Who controls the memory? In this poem, I ask the river to cleanse and to testify. In this poem, I enact the politics of belonging, tying identity to place rather than to the empire that governs it. I insist that the natural world register colonial violence, but also register care. I insist that the river imagine decolonization as both environmental and spiritual repair. Spiritual repair. Can I tell you of the loneliness? The loneliness that flowed in my body, like the loneliness that tightened my joints like arthritis. Can I tell you about the loneliness and the despair that drove me into a deep depression that I could not figure out how to emerge from? Can I tell you about a depression that had me looking for some respite in the bottom of a bottle of alcohol? Can I tell you about an icon ravaged by alcoholism, this brilliant poet whom you celebrate today? Can I tell you that my story is not unique and that amongst you today are many walking in your midst like I once did, and you see what you want to see, but you don't look deeply enough? Can I tell you about the need for spiritual repair? Can you feel the need for spiritual repair? And so I wrote, I poured myself out, even in my hospital bed in Harlem, a woman with no identity and no identification. Show me your papers. Show me your papers to prove your humanity. I resisted the gendered public lady, that role that has been set aside for women that constrains us, Black women even more so. Have you ever wondered why the average Black woman feels the need for so many grooming products? What must we transform ourselves into to be accepted in the public square? I suppose some would argue that I was a feminist long before it became a thing. And still, I wrote. I'm going to share with you a poem that I wrote. It's actually the last poem I wrote. Maybe before that, I will share a different poem with you. Again, the translation. In Spanish, it's Canción Amarga. In English, bitter song. Nothing disturbs my being, but I am sad. Something of a slow shadow beats me. Although almost behind this agony, I have had the stars in my hand. It must be the caress of the useless, the endless sadness of being a poet, of singing and singing without breaking, the peerless tragedy of existence. To be and not want to be. That's the split, the battle that exhausts all expectation. To discover that while the soul is dying, the miserable body still has strength. Forgive me, oh my love, if I don't name you. Outside of your song, I am a dry wing. Death and I sleep together. Singing to you alone wakens me. I suppose I wrote so much because within my writing, I found some peace, even though the writing itself caused me so much pain. I'm trying to find that poem that I wanted to share with you. You can ask me some questions while I pull that up, or share anything that you would like to share.
Okay, so in terms of understanding your work, you made mention of the fact that, or in your words, you said, I am my own path. What do you mean by that?
That was my entire life, understanding the injustices of our world and refusing to conform to them in order to eke out some level of personal comfort, which made no sense to most people. Given my intellect, given the lightness of my skin, I could have been a society woman. I could have been wined and feted. I could have lived relatively a comfortable life, even though it was a colonized life, even though I belonged to everyone but myself. And I chose, again, at great sacrifice, but a sacrifice so necessary, my own path. Because when I considered the sacrifice of never belonging to me, I was willing to risk it all. I absolutely was willing to risk it all. And so I traveled my own path. That's what I meant by that. And I'm still trying to, in this great book that has over 200 of my poems, I am trying to find the one that I wanted to share with you. But carry on with your comments and your questions.
The observation with regards to, you mentioned when you were speaking earlier, you talked about the free press. So this is just an observation. In comparison, the free press at the time, which essentially was trying to organize and inform the locals, what would you compare it to now, where you have the press that whose freedom are actually guaranteed in the American Constitution, busy manufacturing consent for the elites? Would you say the press has undermined itself with regards to its duties to the American people, or would you say that is just in keeping with not supposed to do?
There are no guarantees. I think that is one of the lies that we have been fed and we have wholeheartedly swallowed. There are no guarantees except those which you're willing to fight and die for.
So
the
even
United
when it's
States of
codified,
America, Constitution of the United States of America, is not worth the paper it was written on. Understand that the formation of this nation called the United States of America began, the Declaration of Independence began with what? All men are created equal. Where in society was that practiced?
But some would argue.
So from the very beginning, we should have been crystal clear that the words on the paper meant nothing if we weren't willing to fight for it. Because anything can be said and can be written, but you're guaranteed only that which you will fight to get and keep. So the freedom of the press, when has the press in America been free? When the FBI was surveilling me? When the Ku Klux Klan was running rampant? When Ida B. Wells' press was burnt down? When black men hung and women and children hung like strange fruits from trees? When they espoused Christian virtues while they kidnapped and murdered and raped? When was there a free press? When has the press ever told the truth and been free enough to tell the truth? And what has historically and consistently happened to any of the truth tellers? Tell me when there was a free press.
I mean, that's a powerful question, but some would argue what you're effectively saying is America has been in a dance of pretense for over 250 years.
Is that a shock to anybody?
To come as shock to people who
If
believe.
all people are created free, why is Puerto Rico still not free? If all people are created free, why did the United States of America need all the additional amendments? Why did women have to fight for the right to vote? I was not aware that there were people still under the illusion that this has not always been a sham. Not if they studied any part of their own history.
Well, as somebody said in the chat, I guess that was what was meant by the American dream.
That was what, and it appears that I am not supposed to read this last poem that I wanted to share with you because it is the last poem that I wrote, and my eyes are
Waning.
scheming. Okay, but I will read this poem to you. Listen, I don't want your listeners and viewers to not also feel the passion that flowed through me, to not also understand how much I loved us and how much I loved and believed in who we are and what we are capable of becoming. Certainly, there was a lot of despair in my life, but even in that despair, talking about a split, was always that hope, that light, that understanding that this could not be forever. Some of my poems, I will just give you some of the titles and then I'm going to read one of them. I wrote about love a lot. When you courted me, I wrote about going beyond what is, and my brain has become a star of the infinite. I will read to you called Poem of the Escape in Your Memory. I have another one titled That You Love Me in Green. Because isn't love the thing that we are all seeking? To be seen, to be cherished, to be nurtured. Poem that's titled The Man and My Soul. I am nothing. But let me read this one. And it is called Poem for My Death. Just even looking through the poems that I've written and remembering where I was and what inspired each of them. Do you write? You don't have to. You do not have to be, quote unquote,
a consumer.
Well, the point I wanted to make is that you don't have to feel like if you're not trained in whatever ideology or structure, that is prevailing today, that means you can't write. If you can feel, you can write. And so I will read this one, Poem for My Death. And the subtitle is Facing a Desire. To die with myself, abandoned and alone, on the densest rock of a deserted island, in the instant, a supreme longing for carnations, and in the landscape, a tragic horizon of stone. My eyes full of star graves, and my passion spread, drained, dispersed. My fingers like children watching the cloud disappear, and my reason populated by immense sheets, my pale feelings returning to silence, even love melted brother in my path, my name untwisting, yellow in the branches, and my hands tensing to deliver me to the grasses, to join the last, the integral minute, to offer myself to the countryside with a star's cleanliness, and later fold the leaf of my simple flesh and drop without a smile, nor a witness to the inertia. Let no one profane my death with sobs, nor blanket me forever with innocent earth, that in the free moment I may freely take the planet's only freedom. With that ferocious happiness, my bones will begin to seek little windows in the dark flesh, and I, giving myself fierce and freely to the inclemency and alone breaking my chains. Who could detain me with useless illusions when my soul begins to complete its work, making of my dreams a fertile dough for the fragile worm who will knock at my door? Each time smaller my defeated smallness, each instant grander and simpler the surrender, my breast perhaps will roll to start a rosebud. Perhaps my lips will nurture white lilies. What shall I call myself when all that is left is to remember myself on the rock of a deserted island, a carnation between the wind and my shadow. Son of mine with death will call me poet. And so I collapsed in the streets of Harlem, and I was taken to a hospital with no identity and with no identification. And there I died alone, in some ways echoing how I had lived in some ways. I died on July 6, 1953 at the age of 39. No one immediately claimed my body. And under New York City practice, unclaimed or unidentified decedents are buried on Hart Island, H-A-R-T, the public cemetery, Potter's Field. My grandfather was a slave, bought for 30. I was interred there anonymously about a month later. My dear, my beloved Consuelo, always reaching for me, always looking out for me, all the way from Puerto Rico, galvanized friends and family and traced my case. They secured an exhumation and they repatriated my remains to Puerto Rico for honors and for burial in the land where I was born, in Carolina, to be specific. You should know that I was a poet for my people, and so it's not a tragedy to me that I was buried in a public cemetery with my people. Since the 19th century, Island had served as a public cemetery for people who died indigent, unidentified. Historically, they would get simple pine coffins, similar to the one that Bishop Desmond Tutu asked to be buried in.
Yeah.
And they were placed in trench graves. Records were kept by plot and row to allow later identification and disinterment. And for decades, those operations were overseen by the Department of Correction and burials performed by incarcerated labor from Rikers Island. In recent years, management, I understand, has transitioned to New York City parks with expanded visitation. More than 1 million people are buried there. More than 1 million indigent, unclaimed bodies, including decedents from public health crisis, stillborn infants, and adults whose next of kin could not be located or who could not afford a private burial. But today, I am part of a literary canon. They're bilingual editions and anthologies that place me among foundational Latin American and U.S. poets. In 2010, the U.S. Postal Service, this indigent, unclaimed woman, was honored with a literary arts stamp. In East Harlem, there is an area that is co-named Julia de Burgos Boulevard. There are cultural centers in East Harlem and Cleveland that bear my name. There are schools. I have received honorary degrees. I, who could not keep a roof over my head for portions of my life. There is a lineage to my movement, a movement that I had joined that was part of a longer lineage. My fusion of nationalism, Black identity, and feminist self-authorship has influenced generations of Latina, Afro-Latina, and New Yorican writers and artists. Publish your own work. You do not have to wait to be celebrated. Written much, and much has been written and edited since my death. My first collection, Poema en 20 Surcos, 1938. Canción de la Verdad Sencilla, 1939, also self-published. My sister edited posthumously some of my poems. El Mar, You Too. My sister Consuelo was determined to honor and maintain my legacy. That was published in 1954, a year after my death. Song of the Simple Truth, which is the book that I was reading from earlier. The complete poems of Julia de Burgos, bilingual edition. It has both the Spanish and the English translations in the same book, edited and translated by Jack Agüeros. Obra Poética, published by Instituto de Cultura Puerto Rico. There are documentaries on me. There are autobiographies, but biographies
Biographies,
on me. There are tributes on me.
statutes.
There are statutes, yes. And though it is not what I aspired to, even this should be a lesson for those concerned about charting their own course, walking their own paths. I may not be physically living, but if we understand that we are spiritual beings temporarily having a physical experience in these bodies, then your existence extends before this body and after this body.
Yeah.
And so why not live in a way that honors that? And so even if you are not embraced, celebrated for who you are, for the person you have been created to be in this time, you live it anyway. Because there are many who conform, whose names are forever gone. But I, Julia de Burgos.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Burgos. And yes, what else can we say? You are your own path, like you said, and we've heard you.
I do have a question.
Go on.
I'm curious. I was always curious. That is a mark of intelligence, actually. For your viewers, I would be interested to know how many of them had ever heard of me or my poems before today, and how many of them are Puerto Rican or New Yorican. And what if they had heard of me, what they heard today that may differ from what they had learned in the past. You know, on the island, on Puerto Rico, they do study me in the schools, but even that has been curated. They take parts of me that fit in more with a certain narrative, but they don't take all of me. Just curious as to whether your viewers, your listeners, had ever heard of me. Of course, one of the things that often just irritated me is people who would question whether I am of African descent. Just would cause me to bristle.
Well, I would say on my part, answering your question, no, not before today. But reading your book, Becoming Julia de Burgos, I understand why it is that our paths never crossed. Because like you said, the story is not only curated, but they're also pigeonholed in such a way that your reason for existing the way you existed is not up for debate. Because the moment people start understanding that someone had to live like this, die like this, be buried like this, then, like you said earlier, anybody seeking to inform or organize people is a threat to the status quo. So as long as that person exists, either dead or alive, their story has to be framed in such a way that it doesn't disturb the status quo.
Well, pass my story on. Let my
It will.
words sit with you and let it, I pray. All of our paths are different. Understand that. And I understand that. So I have no expectation that anyone reading my work or studying my life should now choose my path. That would actually be anti what I lived. But you must isolate yourself enough. Cannot hear, understand. And I did not obviously understand it from the moment I started. You take one step and then you see the light for the next step. And sometimes I did not see the light, but I followed my intuition. I followed that inner guiding light, if you will, even when I stumbled and fell. And so what I'm saying to your listeners is, for some of you, you may be going through a time that feels incredibly lonely, incredibly isolating. where you feel so misunderstood and so abandoned, where you're yearning for love and you give it freely, but it is not freely returned to you. It comes with conditions that you can't abide by. And it can get so loud in your head and so heavy, your body trembling for the warmth of a hug from someone who sees and accepts you as you. And I pray that you find that love. And I also pray that whether you find it or not, that you understand that this place of isolation, this place of loneliness is also rich. It's rich with lessons. It's rich with portals that allow you to connect to ancient memories. It is rich with time to do the thinking that you otherwise would not do if you were surrounded by a bunch of people, if there was always merriness and happiness all around you. There's a richness in that pain, in helping you, forcing you even to strip away all of the masks so that you can see you clearly. Because until you see yourself clearly, how can you embrace you? How can you live you? So embrace the path. And of course, today, you can connect in memory in such a way that allows you to do the spiritual repair so that you are not self-medicating with dangerous items like I did. Do the spiritual repair in that loneliness. Do the spiritual repair. That's what I want to leave with you.
Thank you. And with that, we've come to the end of this week's episode of Women in Resistance. Next week, we'll be looking at the life of Edwidge Danticat. Yes.
Are we going to do Edwidge Danticat or are we going to do Abby Lincoln? Who are we going to do?
Whoever what do you
Whoever
think?
the spirits call upon.
Yes. Let's do Abby Lincoln. Let's do Abby
Lincoln. Yes.
Yeah. So next week, it will be the turn of Abby Lincoln to see how she, as a woman, resisted. And again, this idea in itself was a sister's idea. I was just being the nosy bugger that I am.
I feel like I need to take off the wig to tell we've told this story before though, haven't we?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah. So Adesoji is the brother, the friend that you want in your life because he will bother you nicely to death to encourage you to be who you're called to be. And some of you have heard me tell this story before. This young man, because he's younger than me, this young man came into my life at about the same time that my younger brother made his transition from Earth. And I really, really believe that my brother is working through you, Adesoji, to keep me on my path. So this podcast would not be happening without Adesoji. It would not. I was sitting trying to find time to continue with my research and to write and not always making time for it. And Adesoji was like cracking the whip and being that bothersome younger brother. Anybody have younger brothers, they are just irritating as all get out, but you love them nonetheless. That is who this amazing individual is in my life, and I'm so very grateful for you. Thank you.
No worries. Yes, we're here to bug as long as they produces stuff like that, So, you do have a body of work to do. So sometimes when you talk through whatever it is you intend to do, you find you're one step closer to achieving that said goal. So speaking about this women just makes it a lot more easier for you to recall when you start putting pen to paper to say, okay, time to write about this person. Now you know you've read and it's easier and it flows better because there is a rhyme and reason to it as opposed to just sequestering yourself a way to do the writing the old way. I mean, you still need to do the job,
Yeah.
but it's a lot more easier now that you have it out there. You can sense what works and what needs adding to. So that's why we're here. So, yeah. So next week, we're doing Abbey Lincoln. And any final thoughts?
I need more wigs. No, I'm just kidding. No, this is fun.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
But no, thank you. Thank you again. And to everybody who watches and everybody who shares, of course, like, share, subscribe, all of that. Share with young people. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Yeah. And like you said, here we do a lot of informing and organizing of thoughts. So Sunday, join us for the weekly, I said annual. For the weekly African News Review. And again, we're doing the same thing, trying to understand how diaspora locks into what is Africa and how imperialism and neocolonialism does a number on us. Some of us are still in our bubbles, but hopefully with mediums like this, we can come out of said bubbles and embrace, like the good sister said, embrace what our true path is. So until next week, it's good night and God bless.
That is it for this episode of Women and Resistance. Thank you for joining us in amplifying the voices of women who challenged injustice and changed the course of history. Be sure to subscribe, share, and continue the conversation. Together, remember, we honor the past, act in the present, and shape the future. Until next time, stay inspired and stay in resistance.